Rachel Maddow is here, and every second that I spend on a flowery introduction of Rachel is time that could be better spent listening to Rachel. So joining us now is Rachel Maddow, the host of The Rachel Maddow Show and the author of Blowout, the wicked great book that we're going to discuss after we start catching up with Rachel Maddow's look at the week. Where are we? Let me give you the latest breaking. Two congressional sources tell NBC News U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland will appear Tuesday for a joint deposition before the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee. They reported earlier that they expected Ambassador Yovanovitch to be Friday. So Gordon Sondland, who's right in the thick of this, and if there is something that is adjudged to be a conspiracy about what the president's policy was with Ukraine, Gordon Sondland is going to be one of the key levers of that. In addition to the Inspector General, who was there testifying today and who testified at the very start of the impeachment inquiry as well, isn't this the first current official that they've had in there, right? Because Volker's recently resigned. And they've said, no, you can't have any of them. So obviously they're working on some kind of negotiation that's getting them. Right. So, and then soon after, I mean, when did you say it's going to be Tuesday? So Sondland is Tuesday, and then Yovanovitch is going to be on Friday, who is also a current State Department official. She's no longer U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, but she's still a State Department official and a Foreign Service officer. And so this means you're zooming in on the importance here, which is they are not blocking all current officials from testifying the way they have done through the other inquiries that the House has mounted against the administration. I mean, Gordon Sondland has some texts. Yeah. He's in on the text game. Well, Gordon Sondland, I don't know anything about him other than what I read in the press, but he is a hotel magnate. He is somebody who donated a bunch of money, held a Trump fundraiser, and then actually around the RNC, with the treatment of the Khizr Khan family, he and his business partner stepped away and said, okay, we had been supporting Trump and now we no longer are. This is horrifying. Then once Trump actually won the election, he got back in the game, provided something like $1 million to the inaugural. That's how he ended up becoming ambassador to the EU. He has no foreign service background at all. He's an absolute novice in a very highfalutin job who was in the middle of this thing with people who were not novices. I mean, Volker's not a novice, and certainly neither is Bill Taylor, who was the one who was sending him on fire text messages about the impropriety of what they were doing with Ukraine. And so he's a guy who may be slightly over his head in terms of diplomatic matters, who's definitely come in as a Trump loyalist, and that's how he got his job. For him to be conceding or agreeing to go in and talk to these committees, it's a very interesting decision. I don't know what kind of testimony that he'll give. Obviously, he has to worry a little bit about his own neck to the extent that he knowingly participated in what is an impeachable scheme when done by the president is probably an illegal scheme when done by anybody else. And the New York Times reporting the possible, I guess we'd call it the backup whistleblower to the original whistleblower, the second whistleblower. So this one saying, according to them, more direct information. Now, more direct would probably be I heard the call. Probably I heard the call, or I was involved in some of the other machinations here. I mean, we now know over the past couple of days that this was not something that the president cooked up alone, or that the president cooked up with Rudy Giuliani and then the two of them tried to put it into effect. This was something that they involved a lot of people in government toward doing. They certainly involved upper echelons of the State Department in trying to work this out. And so this could be a very senior person. This could be somebody who's either in the intelligence community or in the State Department side of things, or presumably they could be somebody on the military side of it. The only thing we know is that it's somebody who the IG from the intelligence community has spoken to verify what the whistleblower said. So clearly it's going to be corroborating information. But whether this is somebody who's having a crisis of conscience or a recognition of their own legal liability and willing to become a constructive part of this process with whistleblower protections built in, I mean, that is
I'm sure this is freaking the White House out tonight.
Yeah, and it's also someone who, by inference, the president called a spy. The president said that the people who helped the whistleblower or talked to the whistleblower, that was the behavior, he said, of spies. This indicates that this whistleblower was someone who was involved in the original whistleblower's report. That's why the Inspector General spoke to this possible whistleblower. So the president himself might be out there now, currently, inspiring more whistleblowers by the way he's talking about this.
Yes, exactly. Every threat that he issues, especially when he issues threats that don't even seem like, where there isn't any veil on them, where it really does seem like a threat of violence, if not direct retaliation. Every time he does that, he is inviting people who may see themselves in his comments, who may think that he's targeting them, to themselves avail themselves of the whistleblower protections that are afforded under federal law, to themselves see what they can do to protect themselves against a president who says, I'm coming for you.
We're going to squeeze in a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about your book. And as I told you, I do have the audiobook. Have you listened to the audiobook?
No.
I had a feeling you don't listen to your own audiobooks. I had that feeling.
March
that
14,
you just.
14.
Now, let me tell you something about this. When you get the audiobook, that's you, as you and the brilliant director, Scott Schratt, recorded it. However, some people are in a hurry. They can speed you up. We can take you from the exact speed that you spoke, right, up to, let's say,
worth the cost. Couldn't beat it for the advertising.
1.25.
Chesapeake Energy.
That's you a little faster. If I want to get through this bit faster. Now, if I can listen really fast, I can double. You want to double your speed?
Yeah.
Let's double
it.
it.
In attendance figures, the team was the pride of the Plains, Oklahoma's first ever big league professional franchise, pulled its way into the playoffs in just its second season.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to listen to. All right.
It's like me and the Chipmunks.
It is. It's the chipmunk version. Double speed is the chipmunk version. We're going to be right back with Rachel's book.
Let me see that.
Yeah,
Let me see that.
It's fantastic. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.